Hey TikTok, it's been about a year since I stepped onto this platform and started publicly teaching the architecture of CPS, the back end. And I know this system. I grew up in it. I've survived it and I've tracked it for years. What I didn't expect though was how fast after the final components were installed that the switch would be flipped. That happened. I've been clocking this thing my entire life, and I thought we had around 3 more years, but we don't even have 3 minutes. The final switch was thrown on November 13th, 2025, in the form of Executive Order 14359, fostering the future for American children and families. I learned a long time ago that when you're tracking a machine that updates in real time, you can't just keep marching forward without sharpening your tools. You have to stop, you have to look at the work in front of you, look around, check where you're headed, and ask yourself one thing: is this still valid? And I'm not talking about rights lists, ADA arguments, law, or legal jargon that people reach for after a case is already open and a wedge is already driven between a parent and a child. This happens inside a parent's patriae court. That work exists and it has a place, but that's not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm talking about. This lane belongs to the advocates, and to be clear, I am not an advocate. Advocates operate in what I call a containment zone. They know how to and are willing to function inside a system that was designed to sandbox parents. Sometimes they get kids home, sometimes they get judges removed, sometimes they get cases closed. That matters, and thank God. Here's the part that people miss. The moment that courtroom win happens, the system absorbs it. Every motion, strategy, workaround, and pressure point. Then it updates, it hardens, and the walls get thicker for the next family. That's why it feels like this thing keeps growing, because it does. So, while it helps one family, it quietly makes the system more efficient against the next one. That's exactly why I target the system, not the case. Think battlefield, not courtroom. Advocates are medics. They're heroes. They rush in, they stop the bleeding, they get you back on your feet. I'm not downplaying a child returned. That's real and necessary. But that's not my role. I'm viewing this through my own experience and my own less emotional-driven perspective. If advocates are the medics, I would be a defense contractor. I don't need your story, I don't need your variables, and I don't need to know which hotline call or poverty markers pulled you in. My job is to stop the system from targeting you in the first place. A year ago, I said my goal was to end separation, and that hasn't changed. And I don't show up after the damage. I'm trying to neutralize the battlefield so a medic never has to even open their kit. That's why this audit matters now more than ever. I'm working at ending separation. To stay current, I do these mini audits once a month and then a big one at the end of the year. That's what I'm working on right now. It's the end of my first year on TikTok and my 40th year tracking CPS in reality. To fully grasp or even somewhat understand how we got face to face with the worst thing that humans have ever made, I'm about to walk you through the factual proof, not opinion. Here's the real-time build. And yes, as always, please check my math. This system did not appear by accident. It didn't just drift here. It was assembled layer by layer, law by law, incentive by incentive, until it became powerful enough to do what it's about to do next. You can't understand where we're going without understanding how we got here. From what I can tell, this digital computerized beast system, not CPS, but the operating system that does all the work, designed to make money while our families are shattered, it all started in 1974 with CAPTA, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, signed by Richard Nixon. The promise was simple and seductive. We finally take child abuse seriously. Federal money flows to states that build reporting laws, hotlines, and CPS agencies, national definitions, and prevention grants. What actually happened is the federal door opened. Before CAPTA, there was no unified national reporting pipeline. Foster care existed, but it was smaller, fragmented, mostly a poverty overflow. CAPTA paid states to build intake machines, mandatory reporters, investigation units, and once that infrastructure existed, reports exploded. And yes, real abuse was identified, but at the same time, poverty, stress, housing instability, disability, and family conflict started getting coded as maltreatment risk. The numbers tell you everything. Around 318,000 children in foster care in 1972. By 1977, roughly 502,000. That jump happens before the 1980s even arrive. The pipeline is already feeding removals. 4 years later, 1978, ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, is signed by Jimmy Carter. This wasn't reform optimism, this was damage control. Federal data showed that between 25 and 35% of Native children had been removed from their families before ICWA. Entire tribes hollowed out. My own mother, full Dakota Sioux, taken off her reservation and given to a white family. Her last name was Jumping Eagle, changed to Andrews. ICWA slows some of the worst abuses and gives tribes legal standing. But of course, and as we know, enforcement is patchy, states fight it, and courts destabilize it. Native kids remain overrepresented to this day. The system does not relinquish power easily. Then 1980 hits, and this is the moment the machine gets its engine. The Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act, signed by Jimmy Carter. The promise is balance, reasonable efforts to prevent removal, reunification, permanency, adoption assistance, but what it actually did is it locked in Title 4E. Title 4E is not a neutral funding. It's an open-ended federal reimbursement stream for foster care and adoption, not for keeping families housed, fed, or stable, but states spend first, then bill the federal government back, per child, per day, per placement, per service, and everything is audited. This law separates authority from labor. States hold legal custody, and contractors do the work. No one owns the whole chain, and because reasonable efforts are not funded, they become a checkbox, not a barrier. The system learns fast. By the early 1990s, foster care is already swollen, and then speed is added. In 1994 and 1996, MEPA, the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act, and the Inter-Ethnic Adoption Provisions are signed by Bill Clinton. The pitch is remove race barriers and stop delaying permanency. What actually happens is agencies become legally cautious about honoring cultural and community ties. Some kids get adopted faster, but many lose connection permanently. This hits Black and Native families the hardest, right as the drug war and mass incarceration are feeding neglect cases straight into CPS. Then 1997 drops like a hammer. ASFA, Adoption and Safe Families Act, also signed by Bill Clinton. 15 to 22 months, file to terminate parental rights, adoption bonuses for states, reasonable efforts, waivable. So, this is where time becomes a weapon. Parents are now racing a clock that does not pause for poverty, disability, housing shortages, or service delays. Adoption becomes financially rewarded, and the numbers spike. In 1999, foster care peaked at about 567,000 children, the highest recorded. Later, this gets sold as clearing backlog, as progress, as reform actually working. But what it actually does is it locks in a high separation system through the late 1990s and early 2000s. And that's when something finally clicked for me. Because this is right around the time I was 16. My case was still open, I was still a ward of the state, and I had the same caseworker for over 5 years. She'd called every couple weeks like clockwork. Then one day, she just didn't. No warning, no transition, and that had a different meaning in those days. No conversation, just silence. I wasn't in trouble. I was actually working full-time, and I was enrolled in a GED and state diploma program. I wasn't escalating services, I wasn't adoptable, and I also wasn't costing much anymore. That's when the math hits. From 1999 to 2012, the foster care population dropped by about 170,000 kids. That's roughly 13,000 kids per year, about 36 kids per day, every day, for over a decade. That's not kids being healed overnight. That's kids being exited, quietly, legally, on and off paper. And that's when I realized what actually happened to me. I got cheaper. I went from being a line item that helped justify a high census to dead weight in a system under pressure to bring its numbers down. So, I wasn't resolved. I wasn't transitioned. I was simply removed from the count. My medical coverage got cut, my oversight disappeared, and my lifeline didn't taper off. It snapped. And because I wanted out so badly, I didn't even notice at the time. I was just a kid. That's where a lot of us went. By 2012, the number is down to about 397,000, and that decline gets praised. What never gets counted is how many older youth were quietly aged out, exited, or cut loose to make those books balance. When she stopped calling, I just left that home and I never looked back until now. That's not reform, that's erasure. In 2008, Fostering Connections is signed by George W. Bush. Kinship care, sibling placement, extended foster care to age 21. Helpful changes. No change to the incentive engine. Then comes the Obama era, and this is where the system stops pretending it's just social work and fully embraces management science. Barack Obama does not sell child welfare as punishment or rescue. He sells it as optimization, evidence-based practice, performance outcomes, data-driven governance. The promise is accountability, measure what works, eliminate bias, improve outcomes through analytics. What actually happened is the legitimization of metrics as authority. Judgment gives way to models, discretion gives way to dashboards, and risk becomes a score. Under Obama, CCWIS, the statewide automated child welfare information system, is no longer treated as a back-end record system. States are pressured to modernize, standardize, and integrate. Federal guidance increasingly ties funding and compliance to measurable outcomes. Contractors, consultees, and academic partners are embedded to evaluate, predict, and optimize child welfare operations. This is where CCWIS, Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System, is born in spirit before it's finalized in law. Data is no longer documentation, it becomes governance. Caseworkers become data generators and families become data subjects. Children become longitudinal records, and once data becomes the authority, whoever controls the models controls the outcomes. In 2014, the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act arrives under Obama. The promise is protection, normalcy, reducing congregate care, empowering youth, helpful edges, but the deeper function is standardization, tracking placements, monitoring movement, expanding data capture under the language of safety. Then, in 2016, the CCWIS final rule is issued. This is the quiet revolution: modular systems, interpolarity, data sharing, vendor ecosystems, and states are told to modernize or lose federal support. Surveillance architecture is now federal expectation, not optional innovation. If CCWIS was the digital nervous system, CCWIS is the interface layer that connects the beast to the rest of the world. Then, 2018, Family First Prevention Services Act, signed by Donald Trump. It was part of the Bipartisan Budget Act. The promise is historic. Use 4E money to prevent removals. Keep kids at home. On paper, states can use 4E for up to 12 months of approved mental health, substance use, and parenting services for families whose kids are candidates for foster care. Group homes get limited, and in reality, it still will not pay for rent, childcare, transportation, or poverty fixes. Surveillance remains, parents are still coded, scored, and treated. Services become compliance gates, not relief. Then comes the Biden era, and this is where the system is stress tested at scale. Joe Biden does not introduce a new child welfare engine. He proves that the existing one can operate under emergency conditions. COVID changed everything. Emergency declarations loosened the guardrails. Massive federal spending floods the states, and data sharing between agencies accelerated. Eligibility systems crosstalk. Privacy barriers bend, and surveillance is justified as safety. Speed is justified as necessity, and the promise is crisis response. Keep people safe. Keep systems running. What actually happened is proof of concept. The system demonstrated it could scale rapidly, coordinate across agencies, and track individuals across programs, and enforce compliance through benefit and restrictions. Under Biden, temporary flexibility showed what permanent governance could look like. Identity verification, benefit tracking, risk prioritization, cross-system analytics, child welfare, healthcare, housing, education, and justice data begin to align. Once that alignment exists, it never fully rolls back. By the time the emergency ends, the architecture remains. Then we hit November 13th, 2025, Executive Order 14359, Fostering the Future for American Children and Families, signed by Donald Trump, back in office. The promise sounds benevolent: education, jobs, housing, scholarships, private partnerships for foster youth, and those aging out. Some kids will benefit. That part is real. But here is what actually changed. The federal government aligned the systems for the next phase. The order reinforces faith-based partnerships and signals protection. It accelerates data monetization, coordination, and analytics. And it does this without touching CAPTA, without touching 4E, without touching ASFA timelines, and without touching CCWIS. States cannot casually resist this because Title 4E is audited. If federal posture shifts and a state is deemed non-compliant, they risk disallowance, retroactive clawbacks, years of payments questioned. Administrators will not fight that. They're just going to pre-comply quietly. So now, the machine is fully assembled. Reporting gate from CAPTA, money engine from 4E, time weapon from ASFA, surveillance architecture from CCWIS, analytics legitimacy from the Obama era, scale proof from the Biden era, downstream stabilization and partner shielding from the EO. And this is where people miss the scale of what just happened. This system is tested first on foster children because foster children have always had the least power, the least privacy, and the thinnest oversight. They live entirely inside state custody, state records, and state permission structures. That makes them the safest population to experiment on. New assessments, behavioral scoring, compliance tracking, predictive flags, outcome measurement, all of it. It can be deployed, adjusted, and normalized with almost no resistance. And once those mechanisms stabilize there, they don't stay there. They move outward to the populations already managed through eligibility, reporting, and compliance frameworks. Veterans, elderly people, welfare recipients, people with substance use disorders, probation and parole, disability systems, housing programs, and immigration services. Each group already lives inside a partial version of this architecture right now anyways. Foster care is just where it gets refined. Then it converges. At that point, participation is no longer optional. You're not opting in, you're already enrolled because your interaction with housing, healthcare, education, employment, or assistance already generates the data. whether you touch the interface or not. The system knows when your rent is due, when support is required, when compliance is missed, when intervention is triggered. This is where digital identity, payment infrastructure, and income distribution mechanisms begin to merge, not as charity and not as reform, but as administration. When eligibility and compliance are already centralized, the most efficient next step is centralized delivery. Universal basic income becomes a logical endpoint, not as a moral decision, but as a systems decision. A single programmable mechanism that distributes funds, enforces conditions, records behaviors, and closes the loop. Digital wallets and blockchain are not added for freedom. They're added because they create permanent records, programmable rules, and real-time oversight. Money stops being assistance and becomes the interface. The system pays through you, it tracks through the transactions, and it decides through the conditions attached. That's why this is not subtle. It's not incremental. This is a transition point, and we're no longer in the era of child welfare reform. We're in the era of population management through data, incentives, and compliance. This was built on purpose, whether by coordination or convergence, it no longer matters. The machine is assembled, the test phase is operational, the expansion phase is queued up and begun parsing. The new era of separation is live.